So the word variance gets thrown around a lot here in Phoenix and Scottsdale, as I'm sure it does in other areas throughout the nation. But what exactly does a variance entail? And why is it important to be able to solidify a variance on certain lots throughout the valley? Well, today we're going to discuss that, so let's get to it. So a variance can mean a lot of things, and sometimes is often referred to as a use permit. And ultimately, when we're talking variance, it's basically anything that is outside the standard code that's required for the zoning on a specific lot. So I'm gonna utilize the example of 55th Place, which is a custom residence that we're building here in Arcadia Proper, to discuss the nuances of why we needed to get a variance on this property specifically. And it should answer a fair amount of questions for those of you that are looking to get a variance in the future. But as always, every lot is unique, every house is unique, and so the circumstances for that variance are going to vary widely. So if you have any questions about this, feel free to reach out, DM us, shoot us a message, and we could be able to discuss your specific needs. But for now, let's focus on the 4 main criteria that is required to get a variance through the city of Phoenix. The first item is that special circumstances revolve around the lot, building, or land that's being used that don't apply to the other homes within the area. So why does that matter here at 55th Place? We are zoned R35, which means that this neighborhood predominantly consists of lots that are at least 35,000 square feet. So basically 3/4 of an acre. However, when they did the plat that associated this lot that resides within this neighborhood, it was only a hair over 19,000 square feet. So ultimately, when the city of Phoenix put their zoning overlay that determined that a majority of the lots were 35,000 square feet or larger, this lot specifically had a special condition that did not reside with a majority of the other lots that surround. So while we knew that there was a special circumstance that resided on the lot, something that was majorly beneficial is that we had already had 2 variances that had been accepted over the course of the last 40 years on this specific property. So from the beginning, we felt pretty confident that we would be able to obtain the variance. However, we have to meet all 4 criteria. So let's move on to the second. The special circumstances could not and cannot be created by the homeowner. And as mentioned just a second ago, this lot was subdivided as it currently sits during the original plat for this neighborhood. So any of the owners that own this property couldn't have possibly created this circumstance by, for instance, let's say taking a 35,000 square foot lot and going to the county and separating it into 2, let's say 17 or 18,000 square foot lots. In the case here, this was the original plat, and the only thing that made it R35 is when they took that zoning overlay years later to put it on top to be able to predominantly zone this area for the majority of lots that resided here. Number 3 is that the variance is necessary for the homeowner's enjoyment and use of the lot. Now, as you can see, as we go down the list, there are some variables and there's things that are subject to interpretation. But in this circumstance, because the lot was relatively narrow and deep, the setbacks created some major concerns in the building envelope that was allowable for this property. At 100-foot frontage with 20-foot setbacks that are required by R35, we would only have a 60-foot wide building envelope. And not only would this limit the ability to build, let's say, something that is architecturally significant, but is also in line with the other architectural type of homes that are being built to today's standard, it almost would have guaranteed that they would have had to go 2 stories and create a box that essentially ran the length of the property. This would have a major impact on the enjoyment that is required by the homeowner. However, one of the most significant impacts would have been the yard space associated with the property because of this relatively small building envelope that would be required under its current zoning. So this brings us to the last of the 4 steps. And this is probably one of the ones that's the most controversial when trying to get a variance. The design or the variance that is within that design doesn't have a detrimental impact for those that would be affected by the build from the surrounding properties. And once again, this is subject to a lot of interpretation. And on this property, we felt like going 1 story with a basement was not only going to give our clients what they were looking for, but it would also be more in line with the neighborhood and help to ensure that many of the view corridors that are so important in this Arcadia Proper, that view at the iconic Camelback Mountain, would stay intact. It also ensured that we wouldn't have to go two-story, which would provide a massive detriment to those that were residing around the property from a privacy perspective, as well as those beautiful view corridors that we mentioned just a second ago. Overall, we thought that this variance would be a slam dunk. However, when we got legal involved, we realized that there were definitely things that needed to take place that would allow us to be able to get neighborhood support, to be able to make up all 4 items and allow this variance to smoothly move through the city, allowing us to be able to build a beautiful custom residence for our clients. So what exactly did we do, and what were the steps that we took to get to a point where we can build? Let's talk about those for a brief moment. So the first item, which probably makes a lot of sense to most of you, is that our clients actually had to close and buy the property. We can't obviously get a variance unless we own the property. And so there is a little bit of a risk associated when putting 2 feet in on a property that you know needs a variance. The second item is going to be getting through some of the conceptual design. Okay, hey, how are we going to design this house? What is it that you want the end result to look like? And how is that going to affect what we need to include in our variance? And in this case, we had 2 major things that we wanted included in the variance, and that was that our side setbacks be reduced. One of the things that we had a really good hunch on was that this has already happened twice on this property, where the setbacks were reduced to 15 and 10 feet. However, with the new structure residing in place, we felt like it was necessary to flip those setbacks so that the south side got a 15-foot setback, which would pull the house further away from our neighbor to the south, and the north have a 10-foot setback that would allow us to be able to move forward with the European modern home that our clients wanted to build. So after working diligently with the architect and the homeowners to come up with something that was conceptually feasible for this property, we moved on to legal counsel that would help us to get through that variance process with the city. They're obviously most familiar with the process, and they're almost an absolute necessity when it comes to anything that is involving a decision that needs to have a level of support from the neighborhood. Now, one of the things that we do in our pre-construction services, specifically with this property, was include any additional work that was necessary that would help move forward with this process. And so we were out canvassing the neighborhood, talking about the project, letting people know why it was that we wanted to be able to achieve this variance. And after working with our neighbors, north and south, we were able to minimize the amount of building structure that is on the 10-foot setback to the north, minimize the height associated with the property to the south. And per the feedback that we got during these visits with these homeowners, we determined that it would be best to pull the house forward about 15 feet for a portion of the property so that we can be able to get further out of the view corridors from the backyard to our south. Ultimately, there's a lot of moving pieces when it comes to variances. So the day that the variance took place, where we have a hearing scheduled with the city, we were able to be on top of all the pieces of the puzzle that allowed us to be able to smoothly transition to a point where we get that variance approved and we could be able to begin design again. Now, while we eventually got to the end result that we were looking for, this process did take about 6 months to complete and provided some additional steps, as mentioned in this video, to get to a point where we can actually finish design and build a beautiful property. However, I will say that this isn't always the case, and there are plenty of variances that are submitted and not approved, and that's why it's very, very important from the very important that from the beginning you have the right team to collaborate with to ensure that you're able to get the end result you want the day that you go under contract on your property. This is one of the unique differentiators of our company. We act as real estate consultants, developers, and builders, and we're happy to be able to provide those services to our clients. It makes a huge difference during the course of design and construction. And if you have any questions in the future, feel free to reach out anytime. And as always, have a great day.